If we say something that's clearly not in our self-interest, that's trust building for the person.
All right, guys, exciting day in the Cold Email Outreach podcast. We've got a special guest, Liston Witherill, the host of the Modern Sales podcast, a fabulous source to learn more about closing deals. Liston's joining us with a background in psychology, behavioral economics, and tons of sales studies that he basically tears through and uses to teach people how to sell better. Liston, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
I know you will. And for our listeners, you should definitely check out his podcast. If anything, just to look at the reviews on there. They're kind of amazing because I was looking for like a 4-star review and I couldn't find one. So it's good stuff coming from Liston.
Wonderful.
Yeah. All right. So we're here today to talk about almost part 2 of this cold email thing. Jeremy and I have been going back and forth explaining how to get prospects to reply with interest. But Liston is joining us today to kind of help us navigate what happens next. So Liston, tell us a little bit about your background and about this sales discovery process maybe and where this all fits in.
So my background is first it started in grad school and I was studying environmental science, which was not part of your introduction. But from there, my stated goal in studying that was to go into consulting. I know, just you ask any 3-year-old what they want to be when they grow up, and they definitely say a consultant.
Yeah, for environmental studies, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. And so I did go into environmental consulting. I was at a biology firm. We would go out and do studies before real estate projects or government projects that had big impacts could happen. And I was running marketing and business development there. And what's interesting about consulting generally is, not to throw my old firm under the bus, but generally there's 1 or 2 people at these larger firms, or if you're at a giant firm like an EY or an Accenture, there's like a managing director in your region and they bring in almost all the work and no one else knows how to sell. And I'm just like, why is that? Why is it so hard? I don't understand. What are we missing here, right? And so I got really, really interested in understanding how do we generate more leads, which is one thing that you guys talk a lot about. But then I also got interested in the human element. What do we do once we start talking to these people, which begs a lot of questions, right? Particularly in professional services, which is what I focus on. So one of the big questions is, how does trust work? How do I develop trust with a new person? Because I don't have a widget, right? So Jeremy, you have an advantage that I don't have and Jack doesn't have, which is you can show someone your product, right? They can go in and use it. It's demonstrable. What's harder is if you're selling a service. And Jack, I can see you smiling because you probably understand the difficulty here, right?
Preach, brother, preach.
Right. So it is harder because it's less tangible and there's more kind of leap of faith that I have to have. I'm taking on more risk as the client if I do business with you, which makes this a very fertile ground to understand how sales work, right? So before I get into kind of the discovery process, and the blow by blow, one thing I do want to point out to everybody listening is if you are used to getting referrals and word of mouth leads coming into your business, you are going to have to spend way more time developing trust and way more time, quote unquote, dating. I'm not a big fan of these dating analogies in sales, but it is true. You have to move slower. You got to become friends first before we can really move to the action.
Friends, dating, marriage, babies. Right.
Exactly right.
All right. Great cast, guys. We got to figure it out now.
You know the.
Yeah. Okay. So that's an interesting topic. Why don't we talk a little bit about building trust? What do we really have as a tool in our arsenal when we want to establish trust very quickly with a prospect?
Yeah, and I presume you don't have, a whole life to actually build trust. So it has to be built very quickly as well.
Yeah, that's right. It has to be built quickly and it's happening subconsciously. Like the other person isn't actively thinking, do I trust this person? So the first thing, as you guys probably preach about, is let's say this is an outbound lead, right? The person didn't elect to start the conversation absent some interruption that we put in front of them.
Yeah.
So if we do that, what are they going to do? Always. They're going to go look at your website. They're going to go look at your LinkedIn, right? That's number one. So I have a segment on my show called Buyers Insights where I interview corporate buyers and ask them, how does your buying process work? And it probably won't surprise you that 100% of people said, if you have a crappy website, I'm not talking to you. So I thought that was interesting. So that's trust indicator number one.
Wow. Okay. So website is more important than LinkedIn. Which one trumps the other or equal?
Well, I guess this depends on the individual. I would say they're both important, right?
Okay.
So I can tell you, I get a fair amount of outreach on LinkedIn, and I just posted kind of a whiny little post today about how people don't put any time into their connection request. And so if they send me something generic and they don't have a picture and their company isn't linked, I'm like, I don't have time for this.
Boo.
90% of the other people on LinkedIn, I can learn something about. But if they send me some generic message and I don't know why they want to connect and I can't figure it out on my own, no thanks, I'm moving on.
Yeah. So one thing I notice is, I think I picked this up on your LinkedIn profile, and I guess that sort of backs up what you just said. We research people before we interact with them. So yeah, I was on your LinkedIn. But for salespeople listening, I believe your LinkedIn is a chance for you to not necessarily pitch and give a hard sales message, but instead make sure that your messaging is lined up with the kind of person that is going to be in your sales funnel. So maybe you'll have content that they can consume to learn more about yourself, but also the way you set up your bio shouldn't necessarily be, I'm a salesperson, we sell this, and kind of contact me for more. I think it can go a step further, and you can have different calls to action. I don't know. I think you did a great job with your LinkedIn. Really quick, it's a side topic, but do you have any tips for making your LinkedIn page better? Like one or two you could share?
Here's the number one tip I would give you. Have a good professional looking photo of yourself where I can see your face and your dog isn't in it and your husband or wife isn't in it and you're not looking sloppy or disheveled. Your hair looks fine. Here's the thing, right? iPhone 11, I have a Google Pixel. If you have a modern smartphone, you can get a professional looking headshot if you just go out and stand in the sun and have someone else take your picture. Please do that. Fill out your profile, put all the companies that you've worked for that are relevant. I don't care if you worked at a theme park for a summer, that shouldn't go on there, right? But put everything that's relevant on that page and start asking for some recommendations and giving recommendations, because I think that's another indicator, right? So if you don't care about search on LinkedIn, God, I don't want to get too distracted here, but if you don't care about search and you're just worried about what we said, which is I email people, they're going to go check out my LinkedIn and my company's website, then just fill out your profile completely and make sure the right information is there that meets the buyer. Who cares what you want? It shouldn't be your resume, right? Whether or not you want to get recruited into a new company shouldn't be as important as whether you're going to make the next sale, in my opinion.
Okay, brilliant. So we've tightened up our LinkedIn. Our website hopefully is not 2010. So now what?
So how'd we get here, right? So back to this original question is how do we develop trust quickly?
Yeah.
So, for us to do our website, to do our LinkedIn, a lot of time. For the prospect, it's going to take them 1 minute to make a snap judgment about whether or not you're worth it.
That's right.
Right? So that's number one, is you have to check those boxes. These are now requisites. These aren't nice to haves. You have to have them. The next thing is, how does trust basically work, right? So what we're looking for, not us, the salesperson, us, the human race, we're looking for indicators that show us whether or not this person is trustworthy. What does that mean?
So these indicators like Cialdini's book, Influence, talking about authority, credibility, social proof, that kind of thing.
Yes. So those would contribute to our persuasive abilities. Yes, for sure. What we're also doing with trust is, especially when we're in a relationship with someone, it's about creating expectations and meeting them. Let me say that one more time because it's really worth you internalizing this. In relationships, it's all about creating expectations and meeting them. So what does that mean?
What does it mean? Yeah.
If you email someone and say, hey, can you jump on a phone call next Friday? And they email you back and you say yes, and then you don't get back to them until the following week. Well, you've just failed, right?
Okay.
So if initially, before we even talk to someone, they're going to be making all these judgments about what kind of promises we're making and if we're meeting them. Once we're on the phone with them, again, it's all about creating expectations and meeting or exceeding those expectations. When we fall short of them, we are losing. So one easy way in practice to do this is on your first call, you set the agenda. You show up, and usually with outbound, we'll start with a quick 15-minute call just to build a little bit of rapport, show them what's in it for them, and maybe ask them a question or two. We're not going to do a full discovery. We're just going to tell them that right up front. Hey, my agenda today, not to sell you anything, right? What I want to find out is what piqued your interest about my message. I'll tell you a little bit about what I have going on. And at the end of this call, we can mutually make a decision about whether it's worth our time to do this again for 30 minutes or an hour. How does that sound?
Brilliant. Yeah. So just to be really clear, for our listeners who do happen to have a product like Jeremy's Quick Mail, do they need to follow the same script?
Okay. So here's what I'd say. If your average lifetime value is below, let's say, $3,000, and ideally it's 10,000 is kind of the threshold, you're going to want to take a much more hand-holding kind of approach. Slower, more plotting, more calls, more trust will be required. Each prospect is worth a lot more to you.
Sure.
If your average value is below that, you probably are in a more transactional mode, and you're probably in a much more commoditized market.
That's right.
If that's the case, we are moving much faster and spending a lot less time with each person, right? Now, what I'd still say, because I've been on a lot of terrible software demos, Jeremy, and that's no comment about your company, I don't know what your demos look
It
like.
will be a terrible demo if you come and I have to do the demo for sure. Been doing it for 5 years and I still don't know how to do a demo. But anyway, yeah, I got that.
Well, here's what I was going to say. This is, I think, the thing that most salespeople screw up, or business owners or anybody selling.
Sure.
The thing that they mostly screw up is they get so focused on me. What do I have, right? And the reason I bring up demos is because it's so concrete to see. Like, did someone just ask me 5 questions about why I'm here and then not answer any of them, proceeded to give me a demo that was for someone else? Well, I mean, that's not trust building.
That's right.
Right? Why did I even need to show up to that call? Yes. And, truthfully, I would prefer that. If I'm going to show up and you're going to...
Right. It could have just been a video that was emailed, right?
You can watch it at 2x, which I can't when there is a live demo.
Right, exactly. And if you're not going to answer any of my questions that aren't available in your marketing collateral already, then what's the point?
Right. Is it fair to say that asking questions is the very best or the single best thing a salesperson can do in order to establish trust?
One of many things that need to be done, right? I'm not a big believer in the one thing here.
I like that.
Let's just break down, like, how does human interaction work, right?
Okay.
So there was this really interesting study where they asked students on the first day of class how well they would rate their professor. That's group one. And another group, they played them something like a 10 or a 30-second clip of the same professor, video. And then they asked, how well would you rate this professor? And then they played another group a 3-second clip and asked, how would you rate this professor? Funny enough, they all rated them about the same in the beginning, and they all rated them the same in about the end, right? It was pretty close, which is to say, we make a lot of judgments about people initially, and it's very hard to change our minds, right? So what does this mean, right? It means that we are processing, thinking, judging machines, constantly looking for indicators of whether or not this person is worth my time. Are they going to screw me? Can I trust them? Now, there's a lot of focus in kind of sales literature, marketing literature around how to make good, logical, structured arguments. And those are important, right? Those are particularly important if you're selling to groups of people. Right? So if you have a champion, you're going to have to arm them with a great argument, better yet, a great story to go tell their peers that's going to satisfy the internal needs of that organization. But if that champion doesn't trust you and they're not bought in and they don't feel like, man, Jack, Jeremy, good guys, I want to work with them. It's not to say being liked is the most important thing, but it is to say it could preclude you from doing business with someone.
Right.
So when it comes to building trust, what's the most important thing? Back to your question. I think the absolute most important thing is to make promises and keep them. That is the number one thing you can do with trust. So if you say you're going to email the proposal on Tuesday, email it on Tuesday. If you say that you're going to stick to the time of 30 minutes for a call, end it on time, right? Unless you get their permission to go longer. All these little things really start to add up and paint a picture for the other person about whether or not you are trustworthy. Now, another thing that goes into trust is, do I actually have this person's best interest in mind?
Yeah.
Which is why I named my company Serve, Don't Sell, right? This is where it comes from. This is the idea. Is if I'm asking someone questions in a discovery call about them, and I have on my website 6 sales questions you can ask people. It's part of the podcast series. But I'm going to be asking questions like, why me? Why is now the right time? What have you tried already to fix this, and why didn't that work?
Love it.
So if you're asking these questions and you're actually paying attention and you go back and reference and say to the client, here's what you told me. Did I get it right? And here's how I think I can help you. And also importantly, here's how I don't think I can meet your needs, right? Here's where we fall short. I think it's important to point that out as well.
Interesting. Do you find that when you quote unquote fall short, that it helps people have more faith in the things you say you can do? It's like I had a summer where I sold used cars. Not many people know this, but I would always point out if there was a flat tire, if there was a ding, and it seemed to just work a little bit. So they say, okay, this guy's not trying to hide something. He'd just tell me the battery's dead. So I'll take his word for him when he said that the engine mileage is accurate, whatever. Is this important for a trust building exercise or just being a good person in general?
Well, both, right? It's the right thing to do, but it also helps people trust you more. Now, the Machiavellian approach would be to find some small flaw and always point it out, right?
That's right.
But I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting being completely transparent.
Okay.
And if you feel that you have to lie, you're doing a crappy job of prospecting, right? You're talking to the wrong people and you don't have enough pipeline.
So fair enough. But what about a simple service, Liston? Like, for example, sometimes people come to me and say, Jack, we'd like you to write our cold emails. That's a relatively straight shot of a service. And it's very much possible that there's nothing that I can't deliver. Am I missing out by not being able to share? Seriously, like something that they're not going to be getting? Would I close more sales if I was like trying to find something that's lacking, even though there might not be?
I love this. So let's go through your service right now.
Okay.
And
Nice.
we can demonstrate to the audience how there definitely is a flaw in your service for some prospects.
Never.
There you go.
Let's start with a question. Do you have equal experience in all industries and selling all things?
For sure, no. All industries, no way.
Nice. Great question.
And does experience lead you to better performance in your email campaigns?
Yeah, without a doubt. I guess I shouldn't look at it globally.
Let's stop there. Yes, without a doubt.
Like global experience.
You got you cornered, my friend.
Okay.
So we know that experience matters, and we know that you don't have the same experience in every area.
Okay.
So now you may still say, well, I'm really good at cold email and I understand how cold email works, which is what I would say if I were you.
Yeah.
But you're probably also more proven and have more experience and more results to show in some areas than others. So we know that experience matters, and we know that you don't have equal experience in all areas. So if I were you, if you were taking on in a conversation with a potential client, and it's an area where you don't have as much experience, but you feel there are other factors that would contribute to your success, that's what I would say to them. I would say, hey, let me level with you for a second. I have some hesitations about this project, and my hesitations are as follows, right? I don't have as much experience in this area. I'd have to do some research. Here's why I think I can do that though, right? This is my process. I've gone into new industries in the past and I've succeeded. here's why I thought I succeeded, right? And here's how I'm going to duplicate it in the future. That's what I would do, because that's trust building. Because any company that makes the claim, we serve everyone equally, I'm just like, no, you don't. That's ridiculous.
Fair enough. Okay, so takeaways for me is being, let's say, extreme transparent. How does that sit? Is that sort of what we're going with? Like taking all the walls down, and if there's any slight feeling that you have of not 100% success, share it.
So I guess it depends on the interpretation of the word extreme. I don't think that in a new relationship that extreme honesty is necessarily the answer, but I would say it is true for sure that if you do have some hesitations, your clients can understand that. And also, they're going to have a natural and healthy skepticism about the things you say. And so you should be able to anticipate that and meet it.
So what I got on my notes is, in order to build really good trust, there is setting expectation and meeting them, even exceeding them. Then there is being very upfront with people, especially showing them some vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Cool.
And I think anytime you act, back to this extreme honesty, I think the core idea here is if we say something that's clearly not in our self-interest, that's trust building for the person, right?
Okay.
So Jack, easy example that you said, hey, I have this great used car, but the tire's flat. Now, maybe not the best example because anybody could see that the tire's flat, but still, right?
But it works. It works.
Yeah,
That's
but it
also
works.
For that example, it's more like product. So you can really call out a feature that might not be what they were looking for. Okay, but that's really helpful. There's something in the back of my head that I feel like us three should be talking about right now, and that has to do with trust building from Robert Cialdini's background of like persuasion psychology, if you will, behavioral economics. I mean, what's in his book Influence, to me, social proof and authority are just screaming right now to say, well, what about these ways to build trust during a sales conversation, or even call number one, the discovery? Like, should we even worry about that? Or is it really all about learning about what the client or lead is coming to the table with?
So in the context of Cialdini, pretty much everything I've talked about so far is the consistency principle. People act consistently with previous promises they've made, and we trust other people who act consistently with the things that they say. How does credibility factor into it?
Well, you mentioned it to your LinkedIn profile and your website.
That's very true too.
Making sure that they're already loaded. So before you have the call, in theory, that should already be being built one way or another.
Right. It's sort of an easy chance to show them brands you've worked with, to make them feel that they're making a smart decision by taking the call with you.
That's right. And also, I'm sure you would say, Jack, well, I'm not sure, but I guess you would say that it helps in your emails to have a sentence in there about a result you've gotten for a similar client.
Yeah, we call them mini case studies.
Yeah, right. We worked with company X and they got all the leads in the world over the first 60 days or whatever it is, right? I think that's important. I do personally, if someone shows up and starts listing off all the companies that they've worked with, or they have a slide with 30 logos on it, I'm just like,
yeah,
come on, man. Like, can we just talk? Can we have a conversation? I'm here because I want to have a conversation, not to hear you talk at me.
Very true. So maybe we should just assume that if the lead gets on the phone with us, the authority, the credibility is there enough. You don't have to go back to it and hammer this person who really just wants to talk about their problems, their goals, their dreams, so to speak. Is that fair to say? Would you say just get right to the client?
I think that's fair to say. I also would always open up these calls with just a quick question. Hey, just curious, what piqued your interest to get on the phone today? I know you could be doing literally a million other things, a billion other things, and you decided to be here.
I love that.
I'm just curious if you can kind of tell me a little bit about that.
Fabulous.
And if they say, well, I was on your website and it looks awesome and I saw you worked with all these other great companies. Okay, let's skip our slide with the company logos on it. They're already sold on that. Why do we need to cover that?
Okay, so big topic and really like a question. I'm really curious how you think this through. You've asked an open-ended and quite brilliant question. What brings you here today? Why are we really talking? What's going on?
Yep.
They tell you, you're quiet, you're listening, maybe you're taking notes. after you've learned, let's say several questions later, maybe we're at the 12-minute mark, how do you take what they said and present that when you start speaking?
That's a great question. So what I like to do is after I ask the questions is say, hey, is it okay if I take a minute just to kind of repeat what I heard so I make sure I'm understanding it correctly? This is one of the key things people get wrong with communication, right?
Okay.
There's the asking and listening, but also you have to do something with it and you have to confirm that you understood it correctly.
Yeah.
Right?
So they know you were listening.
That's what I always do is ask for their permission. Is it okay if I tell you what I understand? I've never had someone say, no, I don't want to hear that. Right? They feel more important, right? That's trust building as well. I care what you're telling me and I want to make sure I understand it correctly. And then I'll just go through it and I'll try to condense it that in a way that sounds like a story, a narrative, right? Where it's like, okay, this thing happened and this is how every movie, TV show, any story you listen to, this is how it goes. I was in a state and things were good. And then something happened and things started to suck and I wasn't sure what to do. And I started to look for answers and here I am, right? Because there's this other future that I want to get towards and I'm not sure how to get there.
Yes.
That's what we're selling is we're the guide. We're the bridge between where you are now and where you want to be in the future. And so that's the story I'll tell back to the client. And sometimes they're like, damn, nailed it, right? And then I like pat myself on the back and feel good, right? But other times they're like, no, actually, I think you got it right, but I missed something. Hearing it back, I missed something that we have to talk about. It's like, okay, great, let's go back to that.
Yeah. So I have to share something that you mentioned on one of your podcast episodes. The episode was Sales Questions to Ask in Discovery, actually. Fabulous episode. I believe you narrowed it down to 4 general topics that you should be exploring during the call. And I want to repeat them. Let me know if I have it right or if I make something up. But in general, those questions are, what's going on now? What would you like instead of this scenario? What's the value of achieving that? And what have you tried before? Those are like pillars of this conversation, so to speak.
So the problem with publishing all the time, Jack, is that sometimes I change my mind or update my thinking.
Oh, interesting.
So that's about right. You're correct. You got what I said on that podcast. I think as I've thought more about it, here's the challenge with the value question. The challenge with the value question is most people won't be able to answer it directly, right? Because they'll go, gosh, I don't know. And so, if I'm Jeremy, it's incumbent upon me to tell you how valuable quick mail is to you, right? And so I would ask.
It's actually not that hard to actually discover it by just asking them what they would do instead. And then you realize, oh, I need to do that. And then you have to basically do the calculation yourself. It seems like you're saving like 3 hours per week. Is that about right? And then they tell you yes or no. And then you can, price it. You say, well, this is the price for quick mail. Do you actually think that is something that you want to pursue? And that's how you get the value.
Yeah.
Well, so you could do it like that. In that scenario, you're comparing the value of quick mail to the status quo.
That's right.
And so it's essentially money saved. Time saved equals money saved.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's another calculation that you can walk people through, which is money made.
Number of new leads.
So let's say now I'm going to be 3 or 4 times more productive.
That's right.
And all of my people will have, this is me pitching your product. All of my people will have set scripts and things to say that I know work the best, and we can programmatically do testing that gives us better answers faster, and we can approach markets. What would that do for you? I mean, what is one more client worth for you every week? And they're like, oh, that would be X. Oh, so you're telling me if I multiply that by 52, it'd be worth this in a year? Yeah. Wow. Does that seem like a reach to you? Right? And they may be like, no, actually, that seems totally doable. Oh, okay.
That's right.
So we've not only saved you money, but we've made you more money in this scenario.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing with value. One question that I would like you to add, Jack, is the why me question. So if you're selling any services and you personally or your company's expertise is what's on the line and ultimately being bought or not bought, I would always ask this question, why me? There's other people who do cold email. Yeah, and in fact, I'd be happy to refer you to a few if you don't want to work with me. Why did you reach out to me? And what you're going to hear now.
I do the same actually with QuickMail as well. I actually ask, it's like, dude, there's so many other products. Why do you choose QuickMail?
Is that right?
And I get great insight from those questions.
So what do you hear typically?
Typically, it's because QuickMail is very well positioned when it comes to having processes in place. And we have a very strong automation focus. So when you have more than one client to handle with cold email, I mean, yes, that really shines.
So that's your differentiator, right? That's how you can position.
It's one of.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
I think so.
I think at some level, all of us are probably a little bit afraid to ask that question because, for example, I never asked that question, but I probably will try it out. And a fear is like, they're going to say, oh, good question. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Should I Google somebody else,
But it never happens. This is a great thing.
But Jack, that's going to be a bad sales lead anyway, right? So nothing is lost.
Right.
In fact, what's gained is you get to the answer faster, right? So now, anytime I tell people to ask these questions, they're always like, well, how do I know where to go from there? And I always say, okay, you're looking at an open-ended question as if people can literally say anything every time. And that's not true, right? What's likely is I ask a question, when did you notice there was a problem? This is one of the questions I tell everybody to ask. When I ask that, I'm likely only going to hear a handful of answers. So for me, when I ask that of professional services firms, they'll say, well, it became clear that I needed someone else to do sales because I needed to focus on running the business. Or they'll say, it became clear when I hired a salesperson and I didn't know what to tell them to do and I had to fire them because they failed. Or it became clear when, fill in the blank, right? There's only going to be a handful of these. And so when you ask the question, why me? Chances are they're going to say, what? What would you guess, actually? Let's do this now.
I love your podcast.
There you
go.
go.
I took your course.
Right.
Hey, I saw you on this blog, or I read your email newsletter, whatever. Yeah, there's like, because I'm not Googleable compared to others, they're actually going to have consumed my stuff before they get to know me, before they reach out.
There is another question that I actually ask as a sort of, not follow-up, but with different type of users, is like saying like, why don't you use, some people actually come to me and then wants to switch things. I just ask them, why don't you keep on using that tool instead? Because at the end of the day, you're going to build trust with that person, because if they say, actually, no, that's fine. Yeah, I can carry on using that tool or use a different tool.
Yeah.
In that case, you're only building trust because they would have discovered them themselves in the future. So it's best to address it right now while we are in the talk. And it also forces you to find a different answer to this one, a different strategy.
What I think importantly too is it turns the tables, right? Rather than me selling myself to them, now they're selling me to me.
Absolutely.
They're coming up with real substantive reasons. So Jack, if you heard, oh, I took your course, it was amazing. Oh, really? What'd you like about it? Right? And they'll tell you, oh, I liked this or that or the other thing. And you'll say, okay, great. That's what I'm going to emphasize now if I do write a proposal or I do want to work with this person.
Sure. Let's go back for a second. We were talking about what to do with all of this insight and learnings that a salesperson would gather on the phone after asking some really good questions. And I've found that just by going back to just a complete rundown of what I heard, sometimes that alone will dissolve sales objections right there on the call. Like, for example, somebody will get on a call with me and say, hey, Jack, tell us why we should choose your agency over the rest. I say,
hate those questions.
No, I actually like them. Do you know what I do? I say, hey, that's a great question. But before I can really answer that in a way that's actually going to be helpful to you, can you tell me a bit of your backstory, some of your goals, like where are you coming from, so I know what to talk about in terms of what's special about the agency? And I can tell you 8 out of 10 times that I put it back onto the prospect, onto the phone, this launches an entire dialogue, a story, if you will, Liston, about their process, how they came to be. They will talk for 20 minutes, and at the end, they'll say, you know what, I'm feeling really good. Hey, Jack, send me that proposal. Let's get started. Everything drops, and it doesn't make sense, but it's almost as if, like you said, listen, they're kind of selling themselves. They're kind of selling you back to yourself. I'm not sure the psychology there, but you know where I'm coming from?
I think I do. Well, so everybody loves to talk about themselves, right? Me is everyone's favorite topic. So that helps.
Yeah.
I would say you could avoid that completely if you start doing an agenda in the beginning and you just tell them up front, I'm going to ask you some questions about your business. I'm sure you're dying to get my pitch. And trust me, it's awesome. But I need to hear a little bit about you first. Is that cool? Right? And everyone's going to say yes, right? They're going to expect that. I would say an alternative approach you can try if someone still takes this tack.
Yeah.
Now, for me, that one is off-putting because I'm like, hey, I'm not a, sandwich that you can buy off the shelf, right? So like, I don't understand why you're approaching this in such a transactional way. Like, I really need to like you and you need to like me and trust me for us to work together.
Right.
Like, there's got to be a relationship. So if you get that question, one thing you could say instead is it all right if I tell you some reasons why companies should not choose me?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, this is good. So I'm seeing a theme here. Listen, I hate cutting you off, but we're pulling back frequently. Whenever we need to sort of reset the tone, it's a pullback.
Right. So this is not my goal isn't necessarily to like take hold of the situation and control it, and make sure that I have all the power. It's not that. I want to show how the person should buy my services, right? So it's like, for some of your clients, Jack, I'm sure they've not bought cold email outreach services or lead gen services. You have to teach them, how should you buy this? How should you investigate it? What questions are important? How am I going to determine if I can't help you, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do, is teach them what's going on. So yes, I think the key thing is we don't just respond to every request. We're the professional. We're going to show them how this should be done.
And you don't fight force with force either. If somebody counters with an objection, you don't have to rush in and provide 3 benefits that are going to put them at ease. It's the other way around. It's counter. Listen, we're going to take things back to the cold email world.
Okay.
We've engaged with the lead. We've got them on the phone. Turns out it makes sense to have a follow-up conversation. And maybe they say, hey, send me a proposal. And I've heard from clients before many times that they'll send a proposal and it's crickets. What can we do? Help us out.
Well, the first thing to do is understand why the person wants a proposal. So in my experience, sometimes people ask for a proposal just to kind of be nice about breaking up with you.
To get rid.
Right? Yeah. So, okay, let's go back to dating, right? Who's gone on a date and you're like, hey, you want to get together next Thursday for this party I'm going to? And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And then you never hear from the person again. It's exactly the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Either they're trying to be polite or they're more indirect or passive, but for whatever reason, they don't want to tell you to your face, I don't like your stuff and I don't want to do business with you. I've already made up my mind. Sorry. So here's the thing. When someone asks for a proposal, is this person really interested? And are we at the point where a proposal is the appropriate next step? And if the answer is no, I would always ask, yeah, I'd be happy to send you a proposal. What would that do for you? And they'll usually say, right? So if they have nothing to say, then they're like, well, it'll help me decide if you're the right fit or not. Okay, well, what questions do you still have in your mind, right? I'd much rather talk about it now than spend...
Damn, you're such a pain to date, Liston.
I know, I'm a pain. You can ask my wife. But I don't want to go spend 2 hours or 4 hours writing a damn proposal.
So true.
When I was working at the environmental consulting firm, we would work with government all the time, which I don't recommend because it's horrible.
Fair enough.
And you have no transparency into the process, and you always have to write a proposal. And the industry kind of unspoken thing was only 1 in 3 of those deals are competitive. And so sometimes the point of writing a proposal was just to show ourselves to them and show we're interested. I would say most firms that I work with, they don't have the time for that. So what we want to figure out is, does this person actually want the proposal? And are we at a point? Because if you're sensing, hey, like, this is not the point where someone should be asking for a proposal, I want to figure out, where's this coming from? And maybe just send them some soft collateral, right? And tell them, I'm not going to do that. Like, I don't think it's the time yet.
One thing that sometimes happen is a sort of diversion, like they're actually selling to their own boss and you're actually not talking to the decision maker. So they need your proposal in order to sell to their own boss. What would you do in those situations?
So I would always ask who else is going to see this.
Oh, nice.
So, I'd be happy to write a proposal. Can we walk through a few questions I have just so I make sure I totally nail it for you? And again, everyone's going to say yes, right? I'm always asking for permission and I'm always getting it. They're going to say yes. And I'd say, great. Okay. What would be in this proposal to make it a home run? And they'll tell you, here's what I need to see in there, right? And I would also ask them, is there anybody else who is part of the approval process and will be reading this proposal?
Right.
And they will tell you, if they are invested in working with you, they're going to tell you answers to all of these questions.
So what I'm hearing, Liston, is my question earlier, what can we do if somebody doesn't reply after we've sent a proposal? You're saying most of the work comes before you even send it. Most of the work is understanding what's a proposal for and what really needs to be on it in order for them to pass it on, get it approved. We need to do the legwork early.
Jack, the proposal should be just a field with the credit card number at this stage, right?
Actually, I only take credit cards over the phone.
There you go.
Yeah, well, right. So basically the proposal should be a formality. That's my take on it, is generally the decision should have been made and there should have been some verbal agreement, or at least from what I know now, I want my client to say, from what I know now, this seems great. Let's move forward with it.
So do you talk price on the phone?
Always.
Always. Cool. Basically, it is a formality because what you're saying is you've covered everything. That proposal is just to send to the accounting department, basically.
Well, if I haven't covered everything, how do I know what to put in the proposal?
No, it's great. It makes it clear. So some of the themes from the call are not being aggressive, asking a ton of questions, and really just not guessing, figuring out what it really means, right? That's what we're trying to do, is put things together more intelligently as a salesperson.
That's right. I would say be curious, don't make assumptions. And if you actually care about the other person, it really helps, because everything I've described to you, you'll be more naturally inclined to do it because you actually care about serving this person.
Well said. Listen, before we leave, I know you're a big reader and you're diving into a lot of economics and psych and sales stuff. Can you recommend a book to our listeners?
One book. Oh my God.
Two.
Can I recommend more than one?
Dude,
Please.
Throw the list out there. Yeah.
Please, my Audible is actually getting low, so I need to get more things to listen to.
So I'd say the single book that most changed my perspective on things is Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. It's an older book now. It's been around for a long time. And it's kind of like a approach to behavioral economics for the masses, with lots of great studies and insights in there. And I promise if you read it, you'll be like, oh my God, we can all this stuff I noticed about people.
Yeah.
It's all true. And there's language for it. So I love that one. One of the recent ones that I really like is called An Economist Walks into a Brothel. And it's about an economist who actually did study what happens in brothels. And mainly the big question is, how do people perceive and get compensated for risk? Which is really interesting.
I love that. That's the best title.
And a really not good title that's very, very dry. But if you have problems with the value conversation, I would recommend How to Measure Anything by Hubbard.
Okay.
It is a book about how to reduce uncertainty, especially when it comes to numerical values, right? So if Jeremy or you, Jack, are trying to figure out how do I establish value for my client, this book will have a lot of insights that'll help you.
Thanks for that. I'm going to tear into the middle one that you mentioned. It's fabulous. Okay, Liston, we're at time and you've filled it with some gems. Guys, you're listening here and you want even more from Liston, definitely head over to the Modern Sales Podcast and tear through. He's got hundreds of episodes that will take a deeper dive on some of the topics we've explored together. Liston, thanks so much, man.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we had a lot of great gems, good takeaways from this episode. Let's do a quick recap right now. First, leads are going to check you out online, both on LinkedIn and your website, before they agree to the call. So right now, make sure that both LinkedIn and your website are professionally updated and relevant to your audience. Next, ask questions and be consistent if you want to start building trust with your new prospects on the first call. You also don't want to pitch in your discovery call. Instead, use it to find out more about your prospect and to see if a second call makes sense. Next, tell your prospect what you heard throughout the call so you can let them know if they were heard or understood properly. A couple more. Be transparent about both your strengths and weaknesses throughout the call. Vulnerability works. And finally, proposal should just be a formality. So find out why it's important to your prospect before you send it in order to reduce the number of people who actually don't get back to you once you send that proposal.
Hey, cold emailer.
Yeah, you.
If you got some value from this episode, give us a high five by sharing a 2-sentence review on iTunes.
Or Stitcher, or TuneIn, that works too.
It's a quick way to help other growth-minded folks like us find this podcast
So they can send awesome emails.
and make everyone's inbox a better place. Thanks.